Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished guests, I'm delighted to be here to represent Boeing as the sponsor of tonight's National Security Dinner. Boeing's heritage in Australia stretches back nearly 90 years, and our operations in country today comprise the company's largest outside the United States. We have nearly 3,500 employees working across 7 subsidiaries at 27 sites, engaged across the full breadth and scope of our commercial airplane and defense businesses. We've got significant research and development activities here, big manufacturing operations down in Victoria, as well as a robust supply chain which supports the broader global enterprise across the company. Every day in Australia, more than 100,000 people fly somewhere on a Boeing airplane, either with Virgin Australia or with Qantas. And of course, on the defense side of the house, we forged a critical and enduring partnership with the ADF, and it's one that we're particularly proud of. And Boeing has, over the years, become part of the fabric of Australia's aerospace industry, but we also know that we can't succeed on our own and that we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. So we tend to ask a lot of questions, and we seek out experts, and we work with the brightest and the best. And this includes ASPI, the nation's leading strategic policy institute, exceptionally well led by Peter Jennings. Thank you, Peter, for all the work you and your team do for the community here. In an address to ASPI in October of last year, speaking about his knowledge of defense, then Senator David Johnston described himself as a slightly educated amateur. Now, those of us who know the minister also know he's prone to some degree of modesty on that front, because one thing that's characterized him from his very first day in the Senate has been his commitment to learning all he can about a subject, and more often than not from the people at the very heart of the issue, the people on the front line. Now, this is an approach that served him and Australia exceptionally well, and I think many of you will be familiar with the minister's bio, so I won't go into too much detail on that, but just a few highlights. In 2007, he was appointed by then Prime Minister Howard to serve as Minister for Justice and Customs. Following the 2007 election, he became a member of the Shadow Cabinet, serving as Shadow Minister for Resources, Energy, and Tourism until September 2008, when he was appointed Shadow Minister for Defense. And this was a position that he, of course, held until last September's federal election, when he was appointed Minister for Defense. All of these experiences, along with his enduring effort to delve into the details and have a lasting impact on the key issues of the day, have prepared the minister exceptionally well for his current role. And in this context, it should be noted that he has always mastered his brief. He's placed a strong emphasis on understanding the intricacies of technology and innovation, of equipment capability and procurement, as well as the need to balance the development of a strong local defense industry against the acquisition of the very best defense capabilities for the Commonwealth. But of course, the job of minister goes well beyond technology and innovation. And any quick look at today's headlines will tell you there are some very large, very complex, and very challenging issues to be faced by a defense minister in Australia. But one has no doubt that his past successes demonstrate that David Johnston is a man who is more than up to the task of dealing with these issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Senator David Johnston, Minister for Defense.
Well, thank you, Ian Thomas, for those very kind remarks, and also for your assistance, friendship, support, not in any partisan way, but in opposition. You've always been very generous with your time, assisting me with how things are going on a whole host of programs that are coming forward, Wedgetail, P8, etc., etc. Ian, I do about 600 hours a year in the air, mostly on your aircraft. I'm very pleased that you know what you're doing. Can I acknowledge distinguished guests, of which there are extremely many here tonight, and I'm not going to have a list of acknowledgements, but I do want to talk for a moment about ASPI and acknowledge their role in informing the national debate, the outstanding work of Peter Jennings, Anthony Bergen, Mark Thompson and Andrew Davies particularly. Greatly impressed with how ASPI grows its people with outstanding young analysts like Natalie Samby, Hayley Channer and Harry White, to name but a very few. Needless to say, I'm a huge supporter and fan of ASPI. Without these and other ASPI analysts, it would have been virtually impossible to frame cogent, coherent, meaningful arguments and policy whilst in opposition. This is a very complex space, as we all know, and having the benefit of objective, clear, non-partisan advice in this space is extremely valuable. When I was first appointed to the position, I was both honoured and humbled by the faith that my Prime Minister disclosed in me. In tackling this daunting challenge, I proceed upon the basis best encapsulated in a phrase that I became aware of in mixing with and researching the US submarine force. The phrase was set out in the US Submariner's Handbook and said, "Train today as if next week is the first week of war." That is a very expensive proposition for us. It's an adage that is very salient to me in terms of our level of readiness, in terms of what we must do in defence into the future. I don't think I'm being too harsh when I say that the previous government did not have defence as a priority. The 2009 Defence White Paper was broadly accepted in a bipartisan approach by the opposition. I pause to say that it was a very important document because it purported to lay out a funding envelope. It was a plan for the future and we supported that plan. However, it collapsed virtually just 9 days later when the budget effectively did not contribute anything to that funding envelope. 3% real growth to the funding base out to 2017-18, 2.2% out to 18, from 18 to 2030. The funding promises in the 2009 Defence White Paper simply went out the window. The past 5 years have been a trial for defence with a series of significant financial setbacks. The strategic reform program was developed with a lot of effort and was largely guided by the Budget Audit Review of 2008 by George Pappas. It was a significant piece of high-quality work that sadly was disregarded as quickly as it was written. The planned $20.6 billion in savings that were to be ploughed back into defence capability never materialised. Since 2009, over $16 billion in defence funding has been cut or deferred, delaying 122 projects by up to 4 years, and reducing the funding provision of over 40 projects and cancelling 11 more, with a significant number of new initiatives launched with great fanfare, but with the fine print extolling the virtues of them being funded out of existing resources. And we saw the advent of a whole new public policy accounting term, absorbed measure. Under the previous government, we saw the amount spent on defence fall, as many of you know, to 1.59% of GDP in 2013-14, the lowest level since 1938. The legacy of that funding envelope and policy decision has been extremely significant. Nothing has been done about the new submarine fleet, Defence's most ambitious acquisition for 5 years, deferral of broad area maritime surveillance, inexcusable failures over Navy's amphibious capability, dithering and deferral over air combat capability, the malaise in terms of caribou replacement, delay over Army's combat and logistic fleet, its replacement artillery, an inability to address replenishment ships, which is a very significant problem that we grapple with every day, inertia affecting health initiatives, and of course the famous bungled SAS pay issue. In short, an unsustainable mess. Our task is, as many of you heard me say, is to steady the ship and provide a plausible funding envelope. That begins with the Prime Minister's commitment to no further cuts, and he's given that commitment. I think that is, in the scheme of what we are confronting across all portfolios, a very significant commitment. And you will hear more about that as the Commission of Audit reports. The 2000 Howard Government White Paper focused on securing key strategic interests, ensuring the defence of Australia, securing the northern approaches, in partnership with our allies, ensuring security and stability in the neighbourhood defined as Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor and the South Pacific. Preparation is now underway for a new replacement defence white paper, as was promised in the lead up to the last election. This has a primary objective: the identification of costed, affordable ways to meet Australia's defence and national security objectives. We have said that this will be done within 18 months. The Coalition, as part of the Defence White Paper process, will be looking at how Australian-based primes and SMEs can be given better opportunities to compete for defence contracts. Having recently visited the United Kingdom with the specific purpose of meeting the famous or infamous Bernard Gray, who's a most delightful fellow, I should say, Chief Executive of the UK Defence Materiel Organisation, the British government of both persuasions have been concerned with the efficacy of defence procurement. Bernard Gray found that in the United Kingdom, defence broadly wanted the highest quality asset or product regardless of the specific requirement. It invariably requested far more assets than were required, and that the defence equipment and support officers were not always suited to negotiate for or upon the best possible terms for the government. With significant reforms and outsourcing strategies, he has been able to reduce the size of Defence Equipment and Support Organisation down from 29,000 to 16,000. I can tell you that I personally had an hour with him in London last month, 2 months ago, a most interesting discussion as to how he achieved those numbers. The further major reform that is taking place inside procurement in the United Kingdom is, of course, as many of you know, the GOCO model, where 3 companies were initially down-selected to conduct defence procurement on behalf of the British government. This has now been reduced to just 1, following the withdrawal of initially 1, then 2 of the consortia. Currently, there is in place an intensive evaluation of the remaining bidder, plus an enhanced DSE model. This evaluation is expected to be completed, Defence Support Equipment model. This evaluation is expected to be completed next year, with one of the 2 current options being finalised as being appointed. Now, defence procurement in the United States is largely already outsourced. A good example of this is Bechtel, who currently hold the GOCO-type contract for the sustainment of the propulsion systems of US submarines, particularly the Virginia, the reactor and the back-end propulsion. I'm not suggesting that this is a direction in which I want to take defence procurement. However, we are interested observers. As we have said in our election commitment, we are examining ways of how to make defence procurement even more cost-effective. This includes a range of options for reforming the DMO, including establishing it as a more independent agency driven by cost-benefit procurement assessments and commercial imperatives. In the context of no more cuts to defence, Prime Minister Abbott has committed the Coalition to grow defence so that the total defence budget is 2% of GDP within the coming decade. That is a very significant commitment. To reach that 2% figure, we need to start growing the budget as soon as broader economic circumstances permit. This will be a significant challenge, and I really do mean significant, but I'm strongly committed to that objective. It is important to remember, however, that the current state of defence resourcing is every bit an unsustainable mess. The government is committed to the reform of defence from a first principles perspective. That does mean, I believe, trimming the bureaucracy, and I say trimming, but more importantly, this process will seek to achieve a more streamlined decision-making process. And the second part of that sentence is the focus. We cannot have a viable, successful defence force that takes 5 years to acquire an essential piece of capability. I need to say a few words about the strategic context for the Coalition's plans on defence. There has always been a risk of imagining that the current set of strategic challenges we face are somehow more complicated and less predictable than in the past. I believe that Australia has always looked outward at a challenging neighbourhood. In the 1940s, we faced and defeated a significant threat to our security and the security of the Asia-Pacific with the assistance of our trusted ally. In the 1950s and the 1960s, Australian governments committed forces to a number of conflicts in the region focused against the spread of communism. For much of the past decade, we have fought very well against jihadi extremism and terrorist insurgency. The challenge for our strategists is to make sure we have the right policy settings in place to inform our strategic posture in protecting Australian interests in a rapidly changing part of the world. Economic growth has transformed Asia, lifted living standards and at the same time boosted our Australian economy. There are as many opportunities out there as risks in our strategic outlook. My view is that defence plays a very important and often unacknowledged role in helping to promote Australia's national interests. My natural inclination is to be forward-leaning in terms of defence's engagement of our neighbours, particularly against a background of rapid regional growth and change. The protection of our national interests demands a preparedness to engage with the region and to firmly put our views about how best to promote stability. Australia, of course, as we know, is a maritime trading nation with global interests. Our economy is the 12th largest in the world, and even in 2012 we were the 13th biggest defence spender. We have a reputation for being an active and serious-minded contributor on global security matters. We are not temperamentally suited to appeasement or the pursuit of diplomacy by avoiding difficult issues. And reflecting our national character, this government is not given to self-indulgent, angst-ridden introspection about matters of national security. Let me briefly sketch the regional security environment. We are seeing the rise of the region, not just the rise of China. South Korea is a rising economic power that also has a capable military which is technologically enabled by its domestic capacity. And countries like Vietnam and Indonesia are also rising both economically and in their security capacity. The region is undergoing broad-based military modernisation, funded by economic advantage. Alongside this military modernisation, there are numerous territorial and sovereignty disputes, from the East China Sea to the South China Sea, internal ASEAN border disputes and flashpoints like the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Straits and the India-Pakistan border. The regional fora that can manage these security tensions are emerging but still relatively immature, like the East Asia Summit. In this environment, what you will see from this government is an outward-looking defence policy focused on constructive engagement with our friends and with our neighbours. During the last 12 months, I have visited and participated in the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, visited Papua New Guinea, visited China, the Republic of Korea, Belgium at NATO, the UK, Afghanistan, the UAE, Indonesia, and most recently the USA for OSMIN. During the next fortnight, I will participate in forums with Papua New Guinea officials, and we will visit New Zealand to discuss defence issues the following week, just before Christmas. Australia will always make its views known, politely but firmly in areas where Australia has key strategic interests. It is important that I emphasise that the Coalition is committed to further enhancing trust and confidence through continuing engagement with China on strategic and security issues. Along with our partners and allies, we are working to encourage ASEAN countries and China to reach agreement on a code of conduct in the South China Sea, a key step to reducing tensions. If I may briefly touch on the matter of the air defence investigation zone in the East China Sea, we have joined the US, Japan and South Korea in expressing some degree of concern about China's decision to announce an air defence zone. We should remember that Australia has a vital national interest in freedom of navigation of not just the seas but of course of international airspace, including in Southeast and North Asia, which are critical markets for us. This is vital to our economic well-being, not simply a theoretical statement of principle. We have a good defence and strategic relationship with China, exemplified by their attendance at our fleet review in Sydney in October, and we are keenly interested in further building that relationship. The prospect of doing that is very good. China will find that we are very open to new thinking about how we might expand our overall defence cooperation. Our defence ties with China are based on a long-standing and frank strategic dialogue. We can respect each other's differences of views when they exist, and we both see the relationship as being more important than any single point of difference. Elsewhere in North Asia, we have a vital and growing regional defence partnership with Japan. We will be actively looking for opportunities to enhance practical cooperation with Japan in areas of defence, including industry cooperation. I see really good opportunities for us to collaborate more closely on maritime security and on a range of key technological issues. We support Japan's move towards a more normalised defence posture to help it make a greater contribution to regional security. As I have said elsewhere, this government is very comfortable with the growing defence and security cooperation it has with Japan. In this context, strengthening Australia, US, Japan trilateral cooperation is a priority for me and for the government. We recognise that our defence capabilities are complementary and we all have mutually supporting roles to play in the stable and secure nature of our region. It is natural and logical that we would increasingly work together as friends to underpin the stability and prosperity of our region. The Coalition also recognises India's place as a regional strategic and economic power, and we look forward to working with India on areas of mutual interest, including development of a more integrated trade corridor from Central to Southeast Asia. There is an obvious need for us to do more together in the area of Indian Ocean security, particularly with respect to the matter of piracy. Let me turn to Indonesia. As the Prime Minister has said, we want to have the strongest possible relationship with Indonesia because that is overwhelmingly in the best interests of both of our countries. Last month, I made my first visit to Indonesia as Minister for Defence. During my visit, I met with my Indonesian counterpart, Minister Purnomo Yusgiantoro, to discuss our defence engagement. I spent a Thursday night at dinner with him, most enjoyable evening, and virtually all of the following Thursday. He is a most engaging and congenial man who disclosed a real understanding of the importance of a close, friendly and professional relationship between us both, and more broadly, between Indonesia and Australia. Let me pause to say that during recent times, that relationship, the defence relationship, has been enduring and strong. Defence cooperation with Indonesia is important to the core security interests of both our countries, and despite the recent suspension by Indonesia of a number of bilateral activities, this government remains committed to strengthening and deepening the defence relationship. It will take some time for current issues in bilateral relations to be worked through, but they will be resolved over time. At that point, our Indonesian friends will find that we are a steady, reliable partner willing to work very closely with them on strengthening our defence and security relationship. That relationship needs patient investment and long-term relationship building. As Defence Minister, I will do my best to contribute to that by being a frequent visitor to Indonesia. Building trust is essential, and that can only be done through a personal contact and the mutual respect that flows from looking at someone directly and discussing these important issues one-on-one and very personally. For many countries in Southeast Asia, Australia remains a close and valued defence partner. We have a very close defence relationship with Singapore, as you all know. which will only become deeper and more comprehensive over time. Our ties with Malaysia, of course, are also extensive. We have built this up over decades, and they are very important to the overall bilateral relationship. Extending and enhancing these regional connections will be a defence priority for this government. And I pause to say that we view our defence attachés as a very, very important conduit to an ongoing dialogue, building trust and rapport with our near neighbours. Likewise, our friends in the Pacific and Timor-Leste, I can say that building close defence relationship is a key part of our relations. My aim is to make Australia and New Zealand the first partners of choice for defence and strategic cooperation for the Pacific Island states. So let me turn to our most important formal relationship, the US-Australia alliance. For more than 60 years, it has served as an anchor of peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific and beyond, reflecting our shared values, common strategic interests, and our great mutual trust. At ASPI just finished, we signed a joint statement of principles covering the coming US rotational presence in the top end in Darwin. These force posture initiatives, which involve rotational US Marine Corps deployments and increased rotations of US Air Force aircraft in Northern Australia, represent a significant extension of our existing defence cooperation and arrangements. We also resolved at ASPI to move as quickly as possible to formalise the governance and funding arrangements for these initiatives through a binding agreement between our two governments. You'd understand that there is some expense, some issues involved in bringing 2,500 US service personnel to Darwin. We need to get those nailed down. Everything is going smoothly and very well as we move towards such a formalised legal relationship. This agreement will reflect our mutual resolve to modernise our alliance for the 21st century. The Coalition supports strengthening of these arrangements. We will see around 1,100 Marines basing in Northern Australia next year, rising to 2,500 in coming years, an initiative which will provide the Australian Defence Force with increased opportunities for combined training with our key ally. That will bring to the top end significant business opportunities for defence, industry and the wider Northern Territory commercial sector. In October, an $11 million contract was announced to build new facilities at RAAF Darwin and adjacent Robertson Barracks. Joint training with US forces also means more timely and effective response to natural disasters. I acknowledge the work that Defence has done with Philippines Assist. HMAS Tobruk is now off station, off Leyte, as part of Typhoon Haiyan relief effort. We've delivered 2 C-17s full of equipment, medical facilities, water purifiers, etc. 1 C-130J. It has been a significant defence effort to respond to that natural disaster. Tobruk also has an MRH-90 on board, one of our new helicopters. The force posture initiatives were announced by the previous government and President Obama in 2011. It is important that the alliance relationship maintains strong bipartisan support in Australia. And indeed, I see that as a contemporary disposition of the current opposition. I trust it will continue. Let me turn to Afghanistan. We're on track to complete our mission in Oruzgan at the end of this month. We will hand over to the Afghan National Security Forces. The end of our mission will mark a change in Australia's commitment to Afghanistan, but let me assure you it will not be the end. Around 400 ADF personnel will continue to be engaged in Afghanistan, training and advising Afghan National Security Forces. We'll be in non-combat roles in Kabul and Kandahar during 2014. As we end our mission in Oruzgan, I would like to acknowledge the great sacrifice made by the ADF. 40 of our soldiers will not be returning home. Hundreds of others bear the physical and mental scars of conflict. We will remember them and we will honour their sacrifice. We have rotated more than 26,500 of our defence personnel through Afghanistan. Some very key strategic outcomes have been achieved. Al-Qaeda has been decimated as a coherent force in Afghanistan. There is a functioning government in Kabul. I was there 3 weeks ago, meeting the Vice President and the Minister for Defence. The government is supported by a national security force that has shown during the immediately past fighting season that it can be and is effective. The lot of the long-suffering Afghan people has been vastly improved. Over the last 10 years, Afghanistan has improved most of all countries on the United Nations Development Index. There are more than 11,000 university students in Afghanistan, a male life expectancy that has improved by 10 years since the year 2000. In 2000, there were 1.2 million enrolled school students. Today, there are more than 10 million, with 40% of school-age girls enrolled. Female voting participation is also at 40%. Importantly, we will see next year the Afghan people going to the polls on the 5th of April to democratically conduct their second election. The government in Kabul faces enormous challenges, but its very existence is not or no longer under threat. Of course, Afghanistan faces a difficult future, but with international support, there is now more hope for the country than we have seen for generations. That means, more broadly, that we are entering a period of lower tempo in terms of ADF operations. As we wind down in Afghanistan, we've come out of East Timor and the Solomons. They are both behind us. These operations have vastly improved the Australian Defence Force's capability, capacity and understanding. Of course, interoperability with our US allies has never been better. We must ensure the hard-won operational lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan are learnt and applied by Defence in future operations, and in doctrine and planning, particularly with respect to our really hard-won skills and abilities in counterinsurgency. I pause to say counterinsurgency is one of the most difficult forms of combat. We have acquired, I think, quite unique and very good skills in that regard. I certainly do not want to see them fall into any disrepair. We cannot afford to be complacent. The world remains a very uncertain place. More than ever, we need an ADF which is properly resourced and equipped to undertake a range of missions, from humanitarian assistance to peacekeeping to counterinsurgency to high-end warfighting. Defence is also a highly effective instrument of Australian peacetime diplomacy, which is what I've sought to have as an underlying theme for this speech. We can strengthen key relationships through defence engagement. We can contribute to building the fabric of regional security by means of bilateral and multilateral defence cooperation. Australia is a valued defence partner precisely because of our strong alliance with the United States, close cooperation with friends and neighbours, and formidable military capability. It follows that this is not a time to harvest a peace dividend, or to assume that defence can be lowered as one of our national priorities. In fact, the opposite is true. I'm here to assure you that defence will indeed be a priority for this government. In finishing, can I say the difficulties that we confront in defence, and there are very, very many in terms of resourcing, are met with a will and competence of very good people, as many of you have heard me say. I am blessed with having senior defence departmental officials and senior uniformed officials that are wise, thoughtful, energetic, strategically savvy and very, very capable. That is the future for us, our people. Thank you for listening.
Well, Minister, thank you very much for a comprehensive speech that I think puts a few pegs in the sand. Always a good thing for a government to do at an early stage.
Thanks a lot. Minister, you mentioned in your speech that you were the possibility of greater cooperation with Japan, including in the defence industry area. Is that, could you explain a little more about where we might seek cooperation, and do submarines come into the equation at all?
Thank you, Brendan, for a very good question. We've already commenced a serious exchange between Japan, the Japanese Navy, the Japanese Defence Department, Self-Defence Department, concerning submarines. They visited ASC. I want to indicate to you that the Soryu-class Japanese submarine at 4,200 submerged tonnes is the biggest diesel-electric submarine, conventionally powered submarine in the world. It is an extremely impressive piece of equipment. It has, I think, on board 3 Kawasaki motors that have an extraordinarily high efficiency and output. That is an area that has concerned us in terms of Collins. The drivetrain issue is a very significant one. I'm quietly engaging the Japanese and hoping that they will see the benefit of some form of cooperation with respect to their hard-won knowledge and understanding with respect to conventional drivetrains of very big submarines. Now, I say very big. We're 3,400 submerged tonnes with Collins. We were the biggest for a while until the Soryu came along. It's on the edge of physics in terms of being able to get through the water. They seem to manage it brilliantly. I'd like them to show us a little bit about the drivetrain, which is industrial technology. We're not so interested in the front end, which is all about their systems and the technical skill in that regard. But the motors are obviously something very special, and I'm interested to engage them and see if they can assist us into the future, particularly with the C1000 program.
Next question, please. Don't lose an opportunity.
Oh, goodness.
One over here, Doug King, and we'll come back to
Minister, I'm Doug Keane from the Office of National Assessments. My question is a very obvious one, but perhaps hard for you to answer. Is there anything you can say about the relationship between the 2% of GDP target and the budget envelope for the White Paper?
Well, Doug, if I may say, they're obviously intimately intertwined. I don't want to say any more. I'm currently working on that funding envelope. We have a number of options before us in terms of the climb. We're working those through Cabinet. I'm quietly confident that we will have something in the White Paper that sets out a plausible, achievable, steady acquisition of capacity in terms of resourcing to that 2% of GDP level. Still early days yet. We've got the Commission of Audit coming down sometime early in the new year. The state of finances in the government is difficult. Can I just say difficult? In defence, it's an unsustainable mess, but in more broad terms, there's difficulties. We need to, as I say, steady the ship and chart a way forward, not just in defence, but more broadly in a whole host of other portfolios because of the funding problems we're confronting as a legacy.
Thank you very much, Senator. I was happily imbibing my wine when suddenly you said we need to prepare for war next week. And at that point, I suddenly sobered up and I thought, what could the Minister possibly mean?
Sure.
And I thought of the North China Sea. Now, as you're aware, we obviously have very good relationships with the United States, and you've actually pointed that out. We also have very good relationships with China. If a terrible accident should suddenly occur up there, your predecessor in the Liberal Party is Foreign Minister, our longest-serving Foreign Minister indeed, a luminous man, Alexander Downer, has suggested that we wouldn't necessarily become involved in a conflict such as that. You know, ANZUS wouldn't necessarily apply in that situation. If the worst actually happened, we wouldn't necessarily become involved in the North China Sea, would we?
Look, I wouldn't speculate on the circumstances of what strategic issues might confront us. That is completely counterproductive to the diplomatic outreach that I've purported to establish as a fundamental role for defence. But what I should say to you is that when a typhoon goes through the Philippines and is as destructive and damaging to the country's infrastructure as that has been, we within 24 hours were able to turn out a significant capacity and capability. Now, you know, that says to me we're not doing too badly in terms of our general readiness. 2 C-17s, 1 C-130J, and Tobruk turned around on the way to the Solomon Islands, back to Townsville to pick up soldiers and a helicopter, and then off to the Philippines. A very impressive result. It's not about necessarily war, it's about readiness. And the CDF is very, very keen on keeping us ready for such contingencies. And I think we can take some comfort from our response to that natural disaster.
I can't see any hands, so I'll exercise the moderator's right, Minister. Just before you step off the podium, to ask one last question, just between us and our closest 100 friends. What do you see as the long-term prospect for ASPI funding?
Great question. Well, Peter, you already know the answer to that. I have complimented you often enough for long enough to let you know that when you come out of opposition, which is the wilderness, you have very few friends in the world in a complex space, as I purported to say at the beginning of my speech. Without ASPI, I can tell you I would be, and we would be, in a very bad state of policy and complex platform and strategy understanding. So there is absolutely no question in my mind that we want to retain ASPI if necessary. And someone said to me we should have an inquiry. I'm not that fussed with an inquiry. I think ASPI is doing a fabulous job. Maybe not my call into the future, but I certainly promised some time ago when there was a threat to ASPI that we would have a policy of an appropriation for ASPI in the budget. At the moment it comes through defence. I see absolutely no reason to change that. I'm a huge supporter and fan.
That's a perfect moment for us to end. Could you please thank the Minister, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, I won't detain you any longer. This also turns out to be, I think, one of the last ASPI events of the year. Can I thank all of you individually and collectively for your support for the Institute over the last 12 months. It's been a fun ride. And as we go through the process of slightly growing the Institute and planning events for 2014, I think you'll find that it's going to be an even more interesting 12 months ahead of us. I think we've also had a really good quality, substantive speech this evening. Minister, I thank you very much for your time. I know how challenging it is to do it in the middle of a sitting fortnight. And so, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to thank the Minister one more time.